We're finally live and we're going to be talking about the Balenciaga collection. Obviously it's Alexander Wang's first collection for the house. It's very exciting. We're hoping we will have imagery, but I think it'd be great if we can talk about how important it is to see a designer like Alex Wang at Balenciaga and what Balenciaga's history will be. So I have a brilliant set of panellists to help me have that discussion, who will introduce themselves.
I'm Deborah Milner, I'm a couturier and I also consult for other brands on couture, including Alexander McQueen.
And I'm Georgina Goodman, I'm a shoe designer.
I'm Jackie Dixon and I am a stylist and photographer.
So let's start by talking about Alex Wang. What do you guys think? Was it? I know it's a bit preemptive, we don't want to sort of start saying whether he's the right choice when we haven't seen his collection, but what were your reactions when it was announced that he was going to be heading up Balenciaga? Anyone?
I was really excited. I was really excited because I think he's kind of got that kind of modern, cool but accessible hand. And I mean, looking at the history of Balenciaga, that's very on brand, you know, or for the ethos of the original designer, Cristobal Balenciaga. So I think he was always about kind of a very modern take on design, and I think that is what Alexander Wang is as well. He's very modern, very cool, but edgy but accessible. So I think it's a good choice.
I'm interested that you say accessible because I think that's one thing that Balenciaga's cultivated quite recently is this sense of real exclusivity, even if it's just in the way that, you know, they keep their shows very private. Most people aren't, a lot of journalists aren't invited to the shows, you know, there's always this air of kind of secrecy. So I think that's what's interesting to see Alex Wang, because it's a lot more, as you said, it's a lot more open. What did you think, Deborah, about?
I did think it was an unusual choice, but I agree with Georgina that it's an exciting choice because Alexander Wang's designs are very accessible and also, as Georgina says, clean lines, and Balenciaga was about that. But what will be interesting to see is how that develops once it comes to the couture collections, because obviously Balenciaga's work was very much about construction and layering up of fabrics. And I also...
Do you think they'll bring back couture? Because they're not showing couture at the moment. Do you think they'll start doing that again? Would you like to see that?
I don't know. I think let's see what he does with the ready-to-wear.
Yeah.
Then I also think Balenciaga, actually, he did cultivate quite an exclusive brand, in as much as he actually closed his doors and said there were no more elegant women to dress when he closed his couture studio. So I think there is a bit of dichotomy there with the exclusivity versus accessibility, although I think bringing someone who has a more accessible look to the brand is exciting and is actually necessary. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what he's going to do and, you know, how he's going to sort of move that forward.
Move it forward. What was so iconic about Nicolas Ghesquière's work there? Because everyone adores it. What was so great?
Oh, it's very hard to pinpoint or to articulate that into a sentence, but I guess, I mean, just going back to your earlier question, I was just thinking about that, and to me there's such a huge difference between the two that I'm reserving judgment until I see what Alexander Wang has done. Not that I'm against it, I do think it's a very interesting choice, but to be diplomatic, I do think they're very, very different and they bring completely different things to the table. So, yeah, I think I'd love to see it.
People have been quite, perhaps it's unfair how they've been quite critical from the offset about the Alexander Wang appointment. And people, I'd say the word is perhaps skepticism, and people have said that this was very much a decision based on building sales in certain markets. So a lot of people said this was just an attempt to build sales of Balenciaga in an Asian market. Do you think this is very much a business decision?
I mean, the thing that I keep thinking is the aesthetics are so different, and I do think of the Alexander Wang customer as being very different to the Balenciaga customer. Yeah. So I'm just trying to get my head around how the two will merge. Yeah. And yes, from a business point of view, I can imagine that it would sell and sell and sell, but it's more kind of paying homage to, you know, Cristobal Balenciaga in the first place. So I'm just curious.
It's interesting because both designers, as you said, are both completely different, but Nicolas Ghesquière was very much about construction, so he did carry that on from Balenciaga, but then he didn't have the clean lines. So, you know, it's interesting to see what will happen.
We've all mentioned, you know, Cristobal, which is really I think it's really interesting to talk about what the kind of codes of that original Balenciaga are, because I think if you work in fashion, everyone's obsessed with it, so everyone talks about it. But for our viewers, I think, what do you think are the main sort of Balenciaga signatures? So we mentioned the clean lines, but
very clean structural shapes. I mean, Georgina was saying before we went on air that he actually developed fabrics so that he was able to create those shapes. So unlike, say, Dior, who would make sort of really big shape and put lots of net petticoats underneath it, he created a fabric so he could do that without anything underneath it. So it had a lightness and a modernity to it.
And it was about the structure away from the body rather than using the body as a structure. So it was more architectural in its approach, and which is why he wanted to invent this stiff, I don't know if it's taffeta, but it's a kind of Duchess satin. What was it? And certain sleeve shapes and the way that he would construct making things in one piece, and his very kind of famous, I can't remember what it's called, the coat that's very square. And of course, we've seen it a lot on the catwalk this season. This very kind of square drop waist, lots of softness and ease. And even in Alexander Wang's collection in New York, was slightly Balenciaga-esque in its drop waistness and its kind of easiness. And
there's a joke that everything's Balenciaga-esque at the moment, which I think is
it is. I mean, when you look back in fashion history, there's the three designers that kind of everything hangs on. Not everything, but there's like Dior, Chanel, Balenciaga, and then from there it goes up, and you can sort of trace it back. And I think that's the interesting thing about fashion. You can trace inspiration back, and Balenciaga is so well documented. You know, there's a museum, a Balenciaga museum that's, you know, pieces that you can go and look at, and online you can look at the structure, and it's incredible. And there's, in the exhibition, there was actual construction of the clothing laid out, and so that would have been an interesting thing for any fashion student to see, that how he draped on the body, and then obviously the patterns would have to be laid back out to make a pattern from. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, that's proper skill that not all designers. Deborah has it. But you know, it's very inspiring as a designer to look at those shapes and think, oh, I could use that as inspiration. So.
And now, the thing is, with all the technical fabrics, there's so many fabrics around that actually have those properties, and you can do it, and you can do it in a ready-to-wear way, which wasn't possible maybe in the 60s and 70s. So I think that's exciting too, if you think about all those neoprenes and things.
See, that's why I'm so curious, because I don't think of Alexander Wang as that type of designer.
That's
you know, I just think of him as being much more modern and edgy and t-shirts and sporty, and which is obviously fine. There's nothing. It's not you know, putting him down or anything. But it's sort of, I just think of, you know, Balenciaga, as you said, at the helm. You know, and it's just how the two are going to merge.
But that's interesting with Alexander that you mentioned the t-shirts, because we were talking about this when we had the panel about his collection. I think there's such, because his T by Alexander line is so successful, it's almost become his coat. You know, you do think of him for like a kind of a slouchy white t-shirt.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of the
complete opposite, you know, to the bell shapes and things that you're talking about.
I have to admit, when I heard, I thought, well, what a ridiculous choice. I mean, it had nothing to do with Balenciaga. And then by chance, a client came for a dress, and she was wearing this top, which was cut in a really brilliant way. I can't really describe it, but it had like some gathers here, and a piece was cut out in the back. And it was kind of loose and comfortable and airy as well, but very modern. And I said, oh, that's great. Who did that? And then she said it was Alexander Wang.
What material was it?
It was just in jersey, it wasn't in a jersey. It was in some kind of, like, maybe a silk or something soft. It wasn't structured. But then in that moment, I thought, actually, that was really interesting cutting. So maybe he's going to bring something.
Some of his own stuff is really good, but I think it is overshadowed by the sense of his brand. I think, you know him for being a sportswear, kind of modern, as you said, t-shirt designer. And actually, I think it's really interesting that you give that example, because I think there's probably tons of items that he's made that are absolutely brilliant, and almost this would be quite nice he could show what he can do in a sense. But then
it was one of those pieces where you think, oh, I wish I'd thought of that. It was really great.
I mean, you know what, having said that, as a photographer, if I go up for a job and someone's like, it's got to be really hard and edgy and black and white in a studio, and maybe I don't have exactly that in my book, but I've got some black and white, and I've got some location, and I've got some studio. But because they don't see exactly that, they're like, no, we can't give you that job. So I'm thinking, just because we haven't seen him do exactly that doesn't mean, you know, that he's not good for it. I'm just curious.
And there is the element, I don't want to be too provocative, but there's an element of who else would have been right. Because I'm interested, because it is very easy to kind of, as you say, pick up and go, oh, maybe he's not the right person. But who would you guys have rather have seen be there?
Good question.
Christopher Kane, he's British. I'd like to have seen a Brit there. I think that would have been really interesting, because he's modern in a completely different way, in a sort of slightly kind of...
First person that popped into my head as well.
I mean, those were the two front runners, weren't they, in all of the kind of... I love that run up to who's going to take over.
Yeah, everyone says they hate it, but everyone actually loves it in fashion. That's so cruel. But.
And I love the fact that Karl Lagerfeld's the last word on he's got the stamp of approval from Karl, you know. And I thought that was quite nice when I was reading the whole story unravel. But I think the thing that we haven't talked about is accessories, you know, because I think really a brand like Balenciaga, it's a ready-to-wear brand. But in recent years, we've had the kind of Uber shoe, we've had
that Laureate bag.
Yeah, that bag that every single person owned. That,
and even the cuffs with the
or a version of, you know, whether it be a high street version of or the actual bag. So the influence on accessories that brand has is incredible, and I think that Alexander Wang's accessories are really desirable.
We had a really interesting discussion about this the other day, about why London designers never seem to be able to capitalise on that accessories, and you don't see in the same way a London designer doing like a really great bag. You know, Alex Wang, he's a very, very young designer. I think people almost forget how young he is, but he's already done these like real, as you say, smash hit bags and shoes. But you don't even see that with our Jonathan Saunders, our Costa McCains. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think early on he's been backed by a company that has direct links to amazing factories. And I think that working as an accessory designer myself, we don't have manufacturing, very much manufacturing for women's high-end shoes here. And very limited manufacturing for bags. Having said that, there is a few companies that still make here, but predominantly it's Italian factories. So to have that kind of link to the manufacturers and the leather and is critical, and the distribution, you know, because it costs a lot to make a collection, to show a collection, to distribute a collection. So, and I think very early on, part of his success was to realise that in order to be a brand, you need to have all the elements. You can't just have a great T-shirt, a great, a good fashion show. You have to have the bag, the shoe, the shop, the this, the that, the everything, the whole package, cool in order to go, we are a brand. So, but
that's a different approach to what we had with Ghesquière, which I think is what was so interesting, because we did all mention, you know, everyone's become obsessed with Balenciaga. And when we were talking about Cristobal, everyone said, you know, you see it referenced throughout history. But I think what's so interesting with Balenciaga is you do see that early part of Balenciaga completely referenced on every catwalk, but you also see the last 15 years of Balenciaga, perhaps even more so, like reproduced in some cases on other runways. And I think it's very sort of big shoes to fill, I think, for Alex Wang in a sense.
Absolutely.
What do you think was so great about Ghesquière's work? What do you think the different codes were for that compared to the original work?
He brought himself, a lot of himself, and there wasn't any fear in the way he designed, you know. And I think that's always refreshing and exciting, and sometimes worked and sometimes didn't work, and sometimes was a bit too much, but it was he always put himself out there. So, and I think that inspired a lot of other designers. As you say, you see little hints of that in other people's collections, and he's a very important designer, and I would love to see his brand, you know, his own brand, because I think Balenciaga was almost like his own brand, but it was Balenciaga. And I think
but it was so much about him.
About him.
Absolutely.
And I love that bravery, that almost kind of positive egotism that he had. And I think that was a lot of the success of the commercial success
It's probably the only way actually to take a brand like Balenciaga at that point, after so many years with it not really doing anything,
a
to bring someone in who just was going to totally do it his own way and forge a completely new path.
It didn't feel like he was ignoring the heritage, I don't think.
No, it didn't, but it was very different to the heritage, I think, although it was very structured. I think it looked different, let's say. But I think that was a good thing, actually.
There was a really interesting thing which I think it was Susie Menkes wrote in her Prada review for this season, and she said it was Miuccia Prada, the only womenswear designer making stuff that women can wear but that still gets under their skin. And it got me thinking a lot about what he did, what Nicolas Ghesquière did, because I think that is exactly that thing. You know, it was actually very wearable, and it was in some ways very commercial if you actually look at the stuff that got picked up by buyers. But there was this sense of it always made you feel that little bit. And
special. Special and empowered. I know it's a real cliche to say, but you do feel empowered, and I do absolutely love his fearlessness. And as he was saying, paying homage to the heritage, but doing it his own way, in a way that was very brave and, above all else, hugely talented. So
let's hope Alex Wang's been just as brave. Should we have a look at the collection? We now have images, finally. So this is our opening look. I think one thing to bear in mind when we're going through these, I looked at a tweet that Cathy Horan had done, and she said that even actually sitting there, being really close to it, it was impossible to work out what the fabrics are. So if she couldn't do it, I don't think we should put too much pressure on ourselves. But I think it was interesting when we were talking about fabrics, because I think that is a big part of this collection.
Yeah, it's quite hard to actually see the cut, I think.
There's a lot of...
definitely homage to the original Balenciaga archives. I mean, a lot of things I've read, he's slept in the... No, not literally slept in the archives, but has spent a lot of time in the archives.
Well, they were tweeting yesterday, our wonderful intern Greg found it, they were tweeting, Balenciaga Twitter was putting out original footage from the original atelier and things like that. So there was this sense of... Yeah.
I'd love to get in that archive.
Yeah. What's interesting is
so would I. That would be my dream.
That second look and this fourth look, it's got a bag, which I think is really interesting given what we were just talking about.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That little...
That double-sided bag, which is actually really similar to something he's got in his own collection, that double-sided bag. And flat shoes. Well, I think it gives it a modern look.
Do you know what that detail is on the front of... Is it like a big metal safety pin or something?
I don't think it's a safety pin. I think it's something more flexible because he's got it on the footwear as well. Yeah.
Oh yes.
It doesn't go all the way around though, does it? Or does it? I can't see.
Let's talk about how, because we said this is an homage to the original Balenciaga. What do you think we're seeing here? Is it in that sort of monochrome palette, the sleeves?
The sleeve cut, definitely. The fact that it hasn't got a seam on the top, which is a definite homage. The draping,
silhouette,
the clean lines, the silhouette.
Definitely the silhouette and structure.
That feels very Ghesquière to me in a sense though. That feels, it is that little bit brave, it's a little bit quirky, it's not sexy in a traditional way.
No, there's a structure to it.
Oh wow.
It's beautiful.
God, that's beautiful.
Great.
It's quite wonderful.
Yeah, I really like it.
Really wonderful.
This isn't what I was expecting actually, because it's
very grown up.
Very grown up and very modest in a sense. It's very calm.
Modest,
it doesn't feel like he's...
I would have expected him to do something quite calm, because if you look at his own clothes with the whole t-shirt thing, it's very simple.
Beautiful.
So that's fantastic.
That's beautiful.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
That's incredible.
I mean, you want to look at these clothes close up. You want to, because there's a simplicity. You want to have a look what's happening with the structure.
You want to look at it, touch it, wear it.
And I think also with a brand like Balenciaga, you're going to get that structure, aren't you?
Yes.
Deborah, you're going to get a lot of structure underneath.
You'd expect to do that.
If you pay that much, you want to look nice and thin, don't you?
That's very interesting, given the original stuff that we were talking about. But it also feels very signature to Alex Wang, because in his, not last season, but the season before that, in his own collection, he did all that amazing cutout stuff. He's almost bringing his codes and merging them.
It's actually quite a
it looks very
seamless
modern.
merge, isn't it?
Yeah, really seamless. It's interesting though, because how I think it's you, Deborah, you're saying, when you actually saw that amazing piece he'd done and you start to think, actually, maybe he is the right person. There is an element where, for the past couple of days, I was clicking through some of Alex Wang's old collections, and you do start looking at stuff and you're like, actually, no, that's quite Balenciaga, that could work really well. And you start to kind of make those links. I think it'll be interesting to see him.
It's funny because I was sitting here going, I'm really curious. And then you look at it and you go, well, actually,
You're like, why didn't I ever think it could work?
this is a beautiful merger.
Yeah.
Actually, although it looks very different to Nicolas Ghesquière, the one thing they both have in common is the fact that they're not trying to make sort of sexy clothes.
Yeah,
they're doing something
completely.
that's quite tough and...
I think it's interesting that you said empowering, because I think that's something that both
Yeah.
of them do in that sense. You know, it's very much about the realities of how women want to dress, but also with an element of fantasy, which is a really hard line to walk, but it never feels like...
I mean, you know, to me, this is sexy because
Yes, maybe I wasn't using
version,
the right word,
our
actually.
version of sexy
Yeah.
is this, whereas,
Yeah.
other people's version of sexy is very different.
Yeah, it's not
That's very
I think this is spectacular.
You want to wear it.
Yes,
Those shoes
exactly.
are beautiful.
I think
Yeah, really beautiful.
absolutely stunning.
That sort of very deep V in the shoe. I mean, that, you know, there's no cleavage showing on the top, but there's certainly a
But
lot
it's
of
just
toe
this,
cleavage.
you know, it's this. It's beautiful.
It's a very shoppable collection as well. I think if
Very,
you're sitting
yeah.
there as a buyer, you've got those cuffs, you've got those bags,
Completely.
you've got those pants. You can imagine being sold everywhere. You know, just
Absolutely.
everyone will want that. And
Yeah.
obviously that's such a Balenciaga
Yeah,
thing.
easy,
Those
quite
really
easy
great
to wear
trousers.
the things. It would have
Like a
been
little
pointless
bow.
taking somebody on who was in any way, I don't want to say similar to Nicolas Ghesquière because you couldn't really be similar, because you know,
But a
he's one
diluted version
person.
of,
There's
yeah.
no point. You've got to do something completely different.
Some people talked about Proenza and said that they'd be brilliant. You know, that was one of those kind of dream ones that was wandering around. And I think Proenza are amazing, but then there is that element where what they do is almost similar to Ghesquière in a sense, you know. So I think it is interesting with Alex Wang because it's a new direction, and that, you're right, that has to be a fresh point. It's like Raf Simons at Dior, you know, it's such a fresh start compared to what there was with Galliano. Now this is in fact a knit, apparently. So
Oh,
it looks
right,
like
is
a
it?
cracked
It's a
leather,
structured
but
knit.
apparently it's a knit. I saw that on Twitter though, so I don't want to say that's completely
True.
allegedly.
Allegedly this is a knit.
So that is a knit as well?
I think so. I know that some of the cracked stuff is knit. I don't want to say that it all is, just in case it's not.
Sort of
And the
mirroring
floor, you can't really see, but it is completely all cracked, yeah.
That's nice.
The marble, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, the buyers are going to be wetting themselves, aren't they?
Yeah.
they're kind of going to be...
But it also feels like you could style this in a really interesting way.
totally.
you know?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Deceptively simple.
The casting's really good as well because he's got all those great girls in there, but
Absolutely.
the
Hair and
clothes
makeup's
of the-
incredible too.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised, but there are a lot of bags. I think that's a boldness to this in a sense. You know, there's that very obvious commercial side to it, which
Yeah. Oh,
This
look
is
at
a
that.
cracked,
Interesting.
Yeah,
this is a
that's
cracked
cracked
leather, isn't it?
That's quite Wang, isn't it?
There are lots of different shoes as well, which
Yeah.
is you can see that. You know, everyone said that they're going to use him to sell the accessories really well.
Yeah.
They clearly are, but.
Yeah, and the accessories are really important in the image that he's projecting, I think.
It's also something people can buy into more affordably. You know, you can imagine girls being like teen girls who love fashion would never have been able to buy into Balenciaga apart from with the bag. But if there's a sense that people can buy the shoes, those trousers look incredible. So is this what you were expecting?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, same here.
It's making me quite excited, actually.
Yeah, me
but
too.
I want to wear it.
I
and-
really want to touch it.
Oh, he's so cute.
It always comes running on, doesn't
I know, it's charging along. Should we go back to that closing lick?
Look at that.
And that's a real updated version of an original. You've got that rounded sleeve, you've got that
Absolutely,
amazing
it's all
trouser.
there. So subtle.
And there's so
simple.
much in that archive that, you know, you can pull another thing out next season. You've got that great, is it called the bangle sleeve? That, you know, it's just a real one of my favourites. And there's so much stuff that he's, you know, oh God, I'd love to get in that archive.
It's amazing that archive is so good because I think this is a kind of, it's a pedantic point to talk about, but this idea that there's an amazing archive, you know, we take that for granted, but some houses, you know, they don't have, we talked about this with some of our couture panels, and it can be incredibly hard for a designer moving into a house and actually having access to the archive. I think, I can't remember who was telling me this, but I think it was the girls who worked at V&A, they had to like make an appointment to go and see the archive and things like that. You know, there's not that same, that ability to be able to get in there as easily.
Do you think even if you work for a house there isn't?
No, completely, because people said that about McQueen when he was at Givenchy, that he's, you know, struggled to be able to see the...
Oh gosh, how annoying.
The archive. Yeah, but
that
you think...
You'd have thought that was obvious, wouldn't you?
But when we were talking on our couture panels, some of the curators who were in said that one thing that they'd really noticed recently was that houses were putting more of an emphasis on getting someone in to sort out their archive. It was just something that they'd never thought about. And some of them said that actually some of the really young designers working now, they realise, you know, they've got to keep an archive, which is a relatively new thing, I think.
Yeah, I think it is for us in this country, definitely. But McQueen have a fantastic archive.
I was going to ask, tell us about the archives. You must have seen some amazing stuff.
Well, just that it is all, now it's all beautifully catalogued and repaired where possible and hung up, and obviously it's, you know, Lee's heritage, so that's really important. And they have an archivist who looks after it.
Yeah. But you think with a house like Balenciaga, you know, you couldn't work without being able to see that.
No, I mean, we, you know, not that I should say too much about what I do with McQueen, but if we're working on something, we can request a piece from the archive to look at it and to see how it's done.
And will you actually look at, like, take the garment completely and look inside it? And
yes,
okay.
Not take it apart, obviously.
No.
but
I think there's an element with some houses where, you know, if you've just got you've just got the imagery archive, that's something like Balenciaga that just wouldn't work unless you could look at the construction.
Yeah, it's so important to look at it. You have to look at the construction, and I've been to the McQueen archive as well. It's like
it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's actually, as well, since he died, it's quite emotional to walk in there and just see this huge body of work and ideas. It's incredible.
So what do you guys think the reaction to this collection will be? Whether it's what buyers are going to think, what the press reaction is going to be? What do you think what's the next stage for Alex Wang at Balenciaga now?
I hope it's positive. Very positive.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like you said about the buyers, you know, it's going to please the press, the buyers, and us.
There's something for everybody, really.
There really is.
And it was a small, intimate presentation, and it's been described as an introduction collection, hasn't it? Rather than, he hasn't come in and gone, I'm fabulous, you know, look at me. He's come in with a certain amount of humility, and I like that. But
he's had some lessons to learn from how other people have gone into a house this year, hasn't he?
Yeah,
absolutely. That was diplomatically fair.
Yeah, it was.
I think there's an element which is, it's nice to see that he's done this in such a humble...
He's a polite young man, clearly, you know.
And it's paid off, look at it.
Should we give him a round of applause then to wrap things up and say well done? Because I think we're all very impressed.
Yeah, very impressed.